I'll tell you the story about Hillary if you don't mind, because I think it's a, and the book is not just about politics. We focused a little bit about politics here. The book is really about why all women's voices matter. So whether you want to be heard in the PTA meeting or in your city council or in your community or at your garden club, it doesn't matter. It's just your perspective is going to be unique and different, and that difference is good and helpful. But the way I got started in politics, I was really steeped as a young girl in politics because my grandmother loved politics. She was a secretary in our state legislature in Albany from the age of 20 on, and she figured out that if she ever wanted to be heard and have a role in politics, she needed to organize other women so that collectively their voices could rise and be powerful together. She created a women's democratic club with a bunch of other ladies, and over time, over her 50-year span, they became very powerful, and in a way that the likes of Albany or anywhere really hadn't seen. And the reason is that these were the women who did all the grassroots work. They did all the door knocking, all the envelope stuffing, all the phone banking, anything in modern day elections that gets you elected. And so frankly, if you wanted to get elected in Albany, you actually couldn't unless you had the blessing of my grandmother and her lady friends, because they did all the work. So I grew up at her side, and I remember going into campaign headquarters in August and stuffing envelopes with rows of ladies, and I just had such a feeling that these women knew what they wanted and knew how to get from A to B, how to actually achieve their goals. And that stayed with me. I did not do politics at all in high school, college, law school, nothing. And I'm sitting in New York City in a big law firm pushing paper, and I noticed that Hillary Clinton goes to China. Now, the reason why I noticed this and why it had such a striking impact on me is I was an Asian studies major at Dartmouth. I had learned Mandarin. I studied in dorms in Beijing. And so the fact that she was giving this speech as our first lady, saying women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights, really blew me away, because I knew what that meant to give that message at that time in that place. And I was kicking myself because I wasn't involved in politics. And I thought if I was ever going to know about this conference or be invited to this conference, I would have had to have been involved. And so that's what got me started. And typical women, we call a friend who tells us what to do. And so I called my girlfriend. She said, oh, my mom's involved. Let me find out what you do in New York City. She says, join a group called the Women's Leadership Forum, which was just an arm of the DNC to raise money for presidential candidates. So I called the lady in charge, and she says, well, to join, you have to write a check. You have to write a check for $1,000. I was like, oh, $1,000? That's my rent check. That's a lot of money. But it was the only advice I'd been given, so I did it. And it made me sweat. I was very nervous about it. And then I get to go to my first meeting. And this first event was a fundraiser, and Hillary Clinton was the speaker. And so I'm standing in the back of the room, and I'm watching our First Lady speak. And she looks out to the crowd, and I'm by far the youngest person by 20 years. And she says, decisions are being made every day in Washington. And if you are not part of those decisions and you don't like what they decide, you have no one to blame but yourself. And for some reason, I felt like she was talking directly to me, that she was actually telling me that if I wanted to change things, I needed to get involved in politics right then and there. Right. And so I did. And so
like
that's
you in the back of the room.
You back there in that navy blue suit. So I really owned it, and I said, this is something I've always wanted to do since I was a little girl. I loved my grandmother. I was inspired by her. And so I started working on campaigns. I started volunteering left and right for every campaign. And I really decided I didn't want to work in corporate law. And so I tried to leave the law, not the law, but tried to leave my big job. So I first tried to get a job at the U.S. Attorney's Office, did not get the job. Then I said, well, I'll try for the charities. I applied to the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, the Rockefeller Foundation. I don't even get an interview. And then Hillary decides to run for Senate. I thought, oh, I'm going to run. This is what I'm going to do. I didn't have the right experience. So I could not find my way into public service after trying all these ways. And I go to an event, and Andrew Cuomo, then Secretary of HUD, gave a speech about why public service is important. And so being the frustrated 20-something I was, I kind of charged up to him and said, well, Mr. Secretary, I would love to do public service, but I really feel like it's an insider's game, and I don't know how to get a job in public service. And Andrew, if you know anything about him, he's very provocative, and he just said, well, would you move to Washington? Now, as a young single girl in New York City, I really did not want to move to Washington. But I said, of course, and I get interviewed a few days later down in D.C. I get the job, and I went home that night, and I talked to my then boyfriend, now husband. And like all things in life, if you have a partner who believes in you and supports you and gives you that right advice at the right time, Jonathan's always been that for me. And he just said, Kirsten, since I've known you, all you've ever wanted to do is public service. Take the job. Davis Polk doesn't need you. I will see you on weekends. So I gave my big firm 2 weeks' notice, and off I went. And it was a very short stint. It was only 7 months because the Bush v. Gore, the Democrats lost the election. But that's when I decided this is really what I was built for. And that's what started me eventually to move to upstate New York and run for Congress.